is now 1:01. And this meeting is of the, get the title correct, Finance and Administrative Committee of the Silicon Valley Clean Energy. What am I here? Will be conducted in accordance with the State of California Executive Order N2920 dated March 17th, 2020, in consideration of the coronavirus. All members of the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Finance and Administrative Committee and staff will participate in this meeting via teleconferencing. Members of the public may observe this meeting electronically by accessing the meeting via instructions above. Public comment can be sent in advance of the meeting to the Board of Clerks, Andrea Pisano, and will be read within the public comment period or the application. I'm trying to read, I've got a light in my eye. The public will also have an opportunity to provide comments during the meeting. The public may provide comments on any matter listed on the agenda. Speakers are customarily limited to 3 minutes each. However, the committee chair may increase or decrease the time allotted to each speaker based on the number of speakers, the length of the agenda, and the complexity of the subject matter. Speaking time will not be decreased to less than 1 minute. If you are an individual with disabilities and need a reasonable modification or accommodation pursuant to the American with Disabilities Act, please contact Board Clerk Andrea Pisano at andrea.pisano@svcleanenergy.org prior to the meeting for assistance. And with that, may we have a call, roll call, please.
Yes, thank you. Interim Chair Gibbons. Gibbons?
Yes.
Thank you. Rennie?
Here.
Barber?
Here.
Mekachuk?
Present.
Klein?
Present.
Thank you. And I will note that Director Martinez Beltran is currently absent, but we do have a quorum of the committee.
Thank you very much. And at this point, I would ask if there are any public comments on matters not listed on the agenda. Do we have any public comments? Seeing none?
Nope.
Okay.
No public comment.
Thank you. We did receive some correspondence yesterday from the public. And with that, we will go to the consent calendar. And this is an action item. It is for the approval of the minutes of the November 30th, 2020 Finance and Administration Committee meeting. If there are any questions or a motion.
I'll move the consent calendar of the minutes of November 30th.
Thank you. Do we have any public comments on that?
No public comment.
No public comment. Thank you. And do we have a second? And or any questions from the board? I think Brian, you were first, Director Brian.
Yes, I was not at the meeting, and if someone on the board could attest that the minutes are accurate of that meeting, then I'll be able to vote.
Thank you. I hope the second might do that. Hello, Director Klein.
I'm willing to second.
Thank you. So we have a motion by, I think that was Director Rennie, and a second by Director Klein. And may we have a roll call, please?
Thank you. Rennie?
Yes.
Gibbons?
Yes.
Barber?
Yes.
Mekachuk?
Aye.
Klein?
Yes.
Thank you. That motion carries with Director Martinez Beltran absent.
Thank you. And we are now at the regular calendar, item number 2. And as was indicated, I am the interim chair of this committee. Item number 2, Andrea, would you like to, the board clerk would like to offer a discussion on this one?
Sure. As Interim Chair Gibbons mentioned, this is the first time that we are meeting as a 2021 committee, and therefore we would like to identify the chair and vice chair for the remainder of the year. So with that, if there are no questions, we can open up the floor for any discussion or nominations.
And I see that Director Martinez Beltran has joined us.
Thank you.
Do we have any nominations from the floor? Well, I can make can I make a nomination as chair?
Yes.
Okay, I would nominate Director Rennie.
I would second that. Although do we, from a process standpoint, do we have to have the person accept that nomination?
If we could, yes.
That's probably a good idea. Director, would you accept the nomination?
Yes, I was chair last year, and since most of our members are new, I guess it makes sense for me to continue on as chair. So I accept the nomination to do so.
Thank you. So we have an acceptance. Do we have any other nominations from the floor, which is perfectly fine? Feel free to nominate. Seeing none. We have a nomination and acceptance by Director Rennie and a second by Director Klein. May we have a roll call, please?
Yes. Gibbons,
Yes.
Barber,
Yes.
Rennie,
Yeah,
Makachuk,
Aye.
Martinez Beltran,
Yes.
Sunnyvale.
Yes.
Thank you. That motion carries unanimously for Director Rennie to serve as the chair of the 2021 Finance and Administration Committee.
Thank you. And I will ceremoniously hand over the gavel. It's all yours, Rob.
all right, thank you. So that closes item number 2 and brings us to item number 3, which is the CEO update. So I'll go ahead, Liz.
Yeah, before I start, Andrea, could you give me slide sharing privileges, please?
Oh, sure. And also, Director Rennie, if we wouldn't mind nominating a vice chair for this.
Oh,
committee.
yes, thank you. So it doesn't close item 2. Let's go back to, let's go back to item 2. I forgot all about that. Okay, so we will go back to item number 2, reopen. Is there a nomination for vice chair for this Finance Committee board?
Mr. Chair, go ahead.
I would volunteer to be vice chair.
I was just going to say it's perfectly fine to volunteer. So I would support your volunteering.
All right, so the motion then, well, why don't I make the motion to nominate Director Makachuk, and Liz did the second on that. That way he doesn't have to nominate himself, which sometimes is awkward. And it looks like he has accepted that. Are there any other nominations? Doesn't look like it. So let's have a roll call vote, please.
Thank you. Gibbons,
Yes.
Barber,
Yes.
Rennie,
Yes.
Makachuk,
Aye.
Martinez Beltran, Martinez Beltran. Could you please unmute? We'll come back. Klein,
Yes.
thank you. And Martinez Beltran, are you there? Okay, we'll count her as absent for that vote, but it does carry that Director Brian Makachuk will serve as vice chair of our 2021 Finance and Administration Committee.
And did we ask for any members of the public wishing to comment on this, although we finished the voting?
Yeah, I don't believe we did.
I don't see any hands raised, so we'll close the comment period for this item just to be official, and close item number 2 and move on to item number 3, the CEO update, and we'll turn it over to the CEO.
Hello, let me start again since I was muted. Director Rennie, members of the Finance Committee, Girish Balchandran, CEO, and Trevin, nice to see you and the Finance Committee. So I wanted to share this slide that most of you have probably seen before, but I think many of these issues are going to come to you over this year in some way or the other. And some of these issues you'll be a lot more involved, or you may be issued in the board or the executive committee. So I thought it's worthy of some repetition, and I'm not going to go over all the items, but maybe pick and choose a few. We will come back to you on the left-hand side. These are kind of items that are going to impact us directly. On the right-hand side are issues that will impact us indirectly, but may still be very major financial issues for us. We will be dealing with COVID-19 customer debt. Both the IOUs and all CCAs have an increase in debt that customers are carrying because we have cut off disconnections, which was our practice in the past. All utilities had a practice of disconnecting if those were not paid. That's been removed, and that deadline expires June of this year. So we'll come back to you on policies there. SVCE staffing, we'll tee that up again when we talk about the budget. Our fiscal year is October through September, so we'll be kicking off the budget process around June. Kind of rolling down, item 8, you'll be discussing later today. Item 7 is financial levers. And when we came to you earlier this year to get our rates approved and a mid-year budget approved, we talked to you about how high the PCIA has got, where our margins have basically been squeezed, and we have dipped into our reserves for the first time. We have a very healthy reserves basically put into place to deal with risks that we've identified. But as we look to plan for the next 3 to 5 years or so, it makes sense for us to revisit the different places in terms of policy where we may be able to change our financial profile. So that's going to be a bit of a strategic issue that Amrit is working on it, and we'll bring that to you in the following months. And we're going to do that in context of all these changes that are happening in our business. Whether it is going on the right-hand side, items D and E, we have some emergency procurement orders that the CPUC has put in place. So we literally are working with 3 procurement orders as we speak. Last year, the CPUC ordered all load-serving entities to purchase 3,300 megawatts of new capacity for reliability purposes. Our share was about 50 megawatts, so we've purchased that. After the August blackouts, they have changed the planning reserve margin for the electric system and have ordered the investor-owned utilities to purchase power for all customers in California and have those costs spread over all customers. Now that, from a competitive standpoint, won't impact us because it's going to go essentially into the transmission and distribution rates. Everyone's going to pay the same thing. But that's an affordability issue. And about 3 weeks ago, they came out with another order, or should I say a proposed decision, about midterm reliability, and have proposed that all load-serving entities buy 7,500 megawatts of power to deal with the net peak that we have in the evening and with the closure of the Diablo Canyon power plant. So that's what's happening in D and E, and at the same time, they're changing the rules of how we plan and purchase for reliability. Now, this grid that we get electricity from is changing dramatically, and we are replacing and rebuilding the grid before the end of its useful life, right? And that's because of climate change. So if we didn't have climate change as an issue, we have so much infrastructure that has a lot of life left in it. But we're going to basically move that out and replace it with clean infrastructure. And this clean infrastructure doesn't have the same kind of reliability potential that the old infrastructure had. So there's going to be a lot of costs involved in making sure we are as reliable as before. And those rules are being written as we speak. So that will also have some pressure on us. Energy-related bills. On the left-hand side, we have SB number 6, SB 612, is a bill that our trade association and us are sponsoring. We have Senator Potentino, who is the author of the bill. He has 18 co-authors, including Senator Becker, Assemblymember Berman, and others from our delegation who are co-authors. Essentially, that will give us a little bit of relief on the PCIA. But there are other bills that are going to add to our costs too. So that may be good for the environment, but it may add to the cost. And last point I want to bring up is direct access. Direct access is the ability for our customers to buy power from suppliers other than us. And as we make long-term commitments for power, we don't have an offsetting revenue commitment from our customers. Our customers can actually leave if direct access is opened up more than what it is today. And that's something that the legislature will be looking at through a report that will be published at the end of this month. We'll be able to make comments on that draft report, and then that report will be finalized in June and sent to the legislature. The legislatures, at the same time, there are bills associated with what's known as provider of last resort. And you have this concept in the telecommunications industry too, where you have competition, but you need a provider who can provide service to those who are refused service by maybe traditional providers. It's basically the backstop. So that is also being discussed in the legislature right now. I know this is a lot, but I wanted to give you more of a landscape and issue spotting kind of overview in the finance committee, because you'll be dealing with several of these issues, and so with the exec committee and the board. So I'm open for any questions you have for me on this slide.
Don't see any questions coming.
Okay.
Oh,
I do
no.
have.
Director Mekachek.
What do you think the risk is that we could lose some of our residential customers? And I know that most of the energy that we sell goes to commercial customers, but what do you think that risk is?
Yeah. So thank you for the question, because I should clarify something I should have said about direct access. The policy issue is limited to commercial and industrial customers and not residential. So our customer base, residential is approximately 30% of our revenues. Residential customers are not being considered for direct access. It's only commercial and industrial customers.
Right, but where I'm going is, if PG&E wanted those customers, could they get some of those customers? And what do you think?
Yes, so good question. So if our residential customers can opt out of our service and go back to PG&E. And so that's the choice that they have. Residential customers basically have a binary choice, PG&E or us. And they have that choice today, and it's expected to continue. And it's the commercial industrial who will have more choices than just us and PG&E. And that's what direct access is contemplating. It's more than just the two of us. It'll be additional providers of service. And many other CCAs in the last month are engaging in these conversations that we are teeing up to. Some of them with more urgency because their reserve levels aren't as healthy as ours. So there are some CCAs that have actually are going through the process of raising their rates to be higher than PG&E. They've also changed their product mix where the default product may not be as green as it was when they started. It may be as green as PG&E's, or it may be as green as what the state requires. So those are the different kind of policy choices they're making. And that's what this financial levers initiative is going to be. We'll come to you with these broad kind of things saying, well, what if we change our product mix? Here's how much play you may have with your reserves. So that's the kind of thing that we'll bring to you.
Looks like Director Gibbons has a question.
Thank you. I was just going to offer too, and Girish, correct me if I'm remembering vaguely. I recall that one of the things that we'll be talking about and have spoken about in the past is that direct access there's a set amount that's available now, and there was legislation that was passed, that will allow that to expand. But it's a lottery. And one of the things that the board has allowed staff to do at staff suggestion is to negotiate a rate packet with potential direct access customers to make it advantageous for them to stay with Silicon Valley Clean Energy. So the staff has been working on an approach for a while now. Everything is dynamic, but we've already been proactive at trying to work out agreements. And one of the strongest advantages I recall is that the mix, because a lot of corporations and their customers want sustainable and business practices, which would support wanting to stay with us with our clean energy and our GHG and our renewables. So if you might speak to that and tell me what I'm remembering correctly, or an update maybe.
No, you're remembering it perfectly. As background, the state as a whole, after the energy crisis, froze direct access to approximately 13% of the state's load that had already gone to direct access. So after the energy crisis, all the small customers got returned back to the investor-owned utilities. And just about a year or so ago, they've opened it up a little bit to about 15% of the state's load in anticipation of opening it up to what I'm talking about, which is basically all the commercial industrial load. So in response to that, the board has delegated to staff the authority to enter into custom contracts within certain guidelines. And we are currently in discussions with 3 large customers to develop some custom products. So we have 3 different custom products in place. And this gets back to some of our strategic priorities, which is we need to put in place the systems that can help with this potential next wave of direct access. And so there's the things that we can do, but there may be things we can also do on the legislative side to get cost certainty, revenue certainty. And those are tough decisions or policy things to push forward, because there's always a choice, right? So if you want revenue certainty, something else has to give. And what may give us choice for our customers. And there are going to be some difficult conversations, both within the board, but also with our policymakers at the state level, if we have an ask for that.
Okay, looks like no more questions. I guess you can continue.
That's the end of my report. Thank you, Chair Rennie.
Okay, let's officially open it up to the public. I don't see any hands raised. Would the one member of our public wish to comment on the CEO's report, item number 3? Does not look like it. So we'll close the public portion of item 3 and move on to item 4, which is a Finance Administration Committee overview.
So I'll go through that. Good afternoon, everyone. Amrit Singh, the CFO. I'll start with a quick overview of this committee. Next slide, please, Andrea. The main purpose of this committee is to provide financial oversight for SVCE, and the 3 main areas that the committee in particular oversees is budgeting and financial planning and reporting. So when we set our annual budget, it will first come to this committee. We would have done so for our mid-year budget update, but we didn't have a meeting in place in time for the mid-year. So we took it to the executive committee, but that is something that would normally go through this committee. Also within the oversight of this committee is internal controls and our accounting policies, investment policies. A lot of these criteria, these responsibilities are laid out in our financial policy that's also available on our website. Next slide, Andrea. And just to briefly give you an overview, some of the past topics that have come before the Finance and Administration Committee, we have brought to you rate changes, and Grish touched a little bit about that, the PCIA uncertainty. We will continue to monitor that, and our financial levers analysis will tie into this as well. We will bring administrative and personnel related policy approvals, investment strategies, power prepay agreement, which we're going to talk about in detail after this presentation. Also, we've brought before the committee the credit ratings. We, as you know, went through 2 credit rating agency reviews, and we got investment grade ratings from both of them, including an A rating from S&P. Next slide, Andrea. In terms of the frequency of our meetings, we can meet as often as necessary, but for the policy, no less than quarterly. So if there's a pressing issue, we will schedule a meeting, and certainly you can request for a meeting. Upcoming topics, in addition to what Grish mentioned, and it ties into what he mentioned as well. In the spring time frame, we're going to be talking about a strategic financial goal and levers. How do we manage the financial uncertainty with regards to PG&E rates and PCIA, and what are some of the actions we can take in preparation for that, especially over the next few years when the PCI pressure is going to be quite strong for us. The other upcoming item, we'll cover this in the next presentation, is the prepaid bond conduit. So this is a conduit, another JPA that a number of us CCAs are setting up to issue bonds to fund the prepayment structure. And that this will have more meaning when I go through the next presentation. But this will be coming before the board potentially as early as April for approval. And in the summer is when we will kick off our annual budget preparation. So we will bring that. First, we'll go through the financial levers analysis in the spring, and then that will set us up for how we want to set the annual budget. We'll bring the proposed budget, incorporate the inputs and insights from the committee before it gets presented to the board in August, and then again for approval in September. And some of the other items, the prepaid transactions, once I go through that, you'll notice that there are a number of transactions that are needed to put in place. And the timing for that is somewhat dictated by market economics. And depending on that timing, we will bring certain relevant information to this committee. And if we have any policy updates related to financial area, we will bring that to this committee. One of the areas we need to revisit is the spending authority per budget. We touched on this a little bit at the media budget presentation, because we have uncertainty when we manage our power procurement portfolio because of movements in market prices and load. And we can easily surpass the budgeted amount because of these variables, uncertain risk drivers that we have no control over. So how can we manage the budget, and what spending authority do we have relative to what we specify in the budget? So we need a policy level review for this. So this is something we will be teeing up very soon. Next slide, Andrea. Oh, that was it. So that's a brief overview of the committee and what's in scope for the committee. Are there any questions?
Director Gibbons?
They gave me an upgrade to Zoom and I'm still looking for the commands. Yes, I was just going to ask if Andrea might be kind enough to send the link to the finance policy to all of the committee members. That'll just save people a little bit of time. I think it would be helpful. Thank you.
Happy to do that.
A good idea. Any other questions? I don't see any. Let's officially open it up, see if the public would like to comment on this item. Don't see any hands raised. Any member of the public wish to speak on this? Go ahead and raise your proverbial hand, virtual hand. Don't see any, so we'll close the public testimony on item 4 and move on, close item 4 and move on to item number 5, which is our power prepay update.
I think I'm presenting. Arya, do I just share my screen?
Correct. Yeah, you should have that ability.
Okay, I'm assuming everyone can see the screen.
Yes.
Okay, so I'll give you an overview of a power prepay structure, and I just want to introduce Mike Berwanger. He's our financial consultant from Public Financials Management. He's joining us for this meeting. He's got a lot of experience, many years of experience structuring prepay transactions, and he's a financial advisor to us and a consultant to us. And he'll be here to add to the discussion and can certainly answer any questions you may have on this as well. And also, before I begin, I want to thank Alternate Director Brian Rikicek for his wonderful suggestions and helping me structure some of these slides that I'll be sharing with you today. I had an opportunity to discuss this briefly with him, and he spent a lot of time understanding and learning the structure and provided valuable insight and contributions that I'll be sharing with you. Okay, so before I begin, just a very high-level overview. What we're trying to do in this structure is bring savings into our power procurement portfolio. So normally we transact with for energy through power purchase agreements. It doesn't have to be long-term deals. It could be short-term deals. It could be renewable power transactions. It could be carbon-free transactions that we transact into, or even our energy hedges that we transact into. We could put the same structure into this prepay, same contracts or transactions through this prepay structure and achieve savings for our portfolio. And we're targeting savings around 8 to 12%. And the way, how does the savings come about? The savings come about because there's an opportunity to arbitrage the difference between taxable and tax-exempt debt. So as a public agency, we or an separate agency that we set up can issue tax-exempt debt. And when you look at a corporate entity, such as an investment bank like Morgan Stanley, who we're working with on this transaction, the corporate debt they don't have access to tax-exempt debt because obviously they have access to their own corporate debt. So the spread between these two debt rates, we are able to arbitrage and bring into in an innovative structure into our translate into savings into our procurement portfolio. And I'll go through the steps in detail as to how we do that. But that's sort of the essence of this whole structure. So how does what we do today and how is that going to change in the prepay transactions? That's what I'll walk you through. So currently we have a PPA seller, power purchase agreement that we signed with a counterparty, and they deliver energies to us. And for renewable transactions, they also deliver the RECs that are associated with that energy. And for that, we negotiate and pay a contract price for that. So let's say this is a PPA seller with one of our counterparties, counterparty A. We have a solar transaction that we did with them for 20 years or so, and we agreed to a price of $30 a megawatt hour. So currently we would pay $30 a megawatt hour for every megawatt hour they deliver to us. And one thing I want to mention is this prepay transaction we are doing in partnership with another CCA, East Bay Community Energy. And so we're both working on this together with the investment bank that we selected, Morgan Stanley. Okay, so first, before we can enter into prepay, we have to do some preparation, some setup. One of the setup is we create a financing agency. We're calling this California Community Choice Financing Authority. So this is sort of like a municipal bond conduit agency. This is the entity that will issue the bonds, tax-exempt bonds. And we're doing this in partnership with 3 other CCAs who also plan to use the same financing authority for their prepay transactions. So first, we're working to set this JPA, and as I mentioned, we're close to finalizing the JPA agreement, which we'll be bringing to the board hopefully in April. And we're finalizing some last-minute details that still remain outstanding, but for the most part, we are done with the main structure of this JPA. So first, we set this up. Then the contract that we had with the PPA seller, we novate or assign to the investment bank, Morgan Stanley. So instead of us paying the PPA seller, now Morgan Stanley is going to pay the PPA seller. Okay. Then what happens is the financing authority will issue tax-exempt bonds. These are non-recourse bonds. So these are bonds that will not show up on our financial statements. Maybe we'll have a footnote on our financial statements, but they're not our debt. And they are guaranteed by Morgan Stanley. So they're backed by Morgan Stanley. So when an investor looks at these bonds, they say, oh, I'm getting a Morgan Stanley creditworthy bond at a much better attractive return because they're tax exempt. I don't have to pay taxes on the returns of this. Okay. So the financing authority issues these bonds and collects the proceeds from these bonds. So then what happens is that the financing authority will take that sum of money and will give it to Morgan Stanley in the form of prepayment for the energy that will flow from the PPA seller to the financing authority. And there's an agreement here called the prepaid agreement that will be entered into that lays out all the terms and conditions for delivery and payment of this energy. So then for receiving the sum of money, again, these are 30-year contracts, 30-year bonds that we issue. Morgan Stanley then will take the energy, and per the prepaid agreement, will give that same energy to the financing authority, who will then flow that energy back to us. So our contractual agreement is going to be with this entity, the financing authority, the JPA that we set up. We will have a power supply agreement with this entity for purchases of this megawatt hours and RECs. And in terms of the PPA seller will be paid by Morgan Stanley at the contract price that we had negotiated originally with them. In my example, it was $30. So $30 Morgan Stanley will pay to the PPA seller. What we pay is basically a contract price less the discount. So before the prepayment structure, we were paying $30 a megawatt hour to the PPA seller in my example. Now, depending on the discount we get, let's say that we get $3 a megawatt hour discount. Okay, so instead of paying for the same energy that now flows through this prepay structure, instead of paying $30 a megawatt hour, we're going to be paying $27 a megawatt hour. And again, the discount, the economics of the discount comes from the spread between taxable and tax-exempt debt, net of some transaction fees and costs. In terms of how the financing authority will service the debt, the payments that we make.
I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but I just don't want to get more lost. Can I just ask here, and if power to if everybody's got this down, I'm sorry. So I'm trying to I understand the spread, I understand the discount, but what I'm trying to understand is, I guess, why the tax exempt and the taxable. I get Morgan Stanley has the taxable, we got the tax exempt. I'm just not sure how that's happening.
Okay. So Morgan Stanley normally would, if they were to raise capital in the debt market, they would issue debt at their taxable rate. They would have to pay higher interest rates on those bonds.
Okay.
Because the investor's saying, I'd rather invest in a muni bond because I don't have to pay taxes on that.
Right.
With a Morgan Stanley bond, I'm going to have to pay tax on that. So I want a higher return on that. So now our JPA that we set up, because it's a public agency, can issue tax-exempt debt.
Okay.
Right. So it issues those cheaper debt, in essence, and gives that money under an agreement as a form of prepayment for the energy that will flow through Morgan Stanley. So gives that to Morgan Stanley. So now Morgan Stanley has access to capital that they otherwise would have had to go through on a taxable basis. But now they get the same amount of capital that they would have needed to raise. They get it
but
through.
It's cheaper.
Yes. And then we negotiate that discount and say, well, you're getting better attractive terms. We want that to come back to us in a form of a discount. So that the power that's going to flow to us, we don't want to pay $30. We're going to pay something like $27.
Right.
And we capture that spread for ourselves.
Got it. Thank you.
No worries. Good question. So the money that the financing authority collects from us, they will use to service the debt, pay interest and principal payments on the debt to the investors. So once this is set up, the way this works is Morgan Stanley will pay the PPA seller. We get the same energy for a cheaper price. The bond holders get their payments to the CCFA. That's sort of the basic of the structure. But as you can imagine, there are a lot of complexity, there are a lot of transactions that we're negotiating to set this up. And that's what we're working through right now. But in essence, this is the basic structure. Any questions, any other questions on the structure at this point? I see Liz with a hand.
Go ahead, Director Gibbons. After you unmute, please.
I raised my hand, but I didn't unmute. So thank you. So I've seen this presentation probably 4, 5, 6 times. And I would like to offer some critique of what might help a little bit more, particularly for some of the other new board members. I appreciate how meticulously you took us through it, but you're also using some language that not everybody might be familiar with, and some of the confusing. So some of the confusion points are that the contracts from Silicon Valley Clean Energy are no longer going to be direct with the PPA. The PPA, the contract we negotiate, is going to say that they're going to be paid by Morgan Stanley, but we're going to be receive the power. So some of that is confusing. I think I'm trying to figure out how to. So for me, the presentation really didn't help me understand what I understood before. So I'm trying to be as specific as I can. I think most people understand that there's a difference. I don't know if you want to call it a spread, but there's a difference between the interest rates, the dividends that one can get from a taxable bond and then a non-taxable bond. And if it's taxable, the rate is higher. And we're just literally taking advantage of that delta. Then the way to do that, and the result of that is that if we have negotiated the $30 a kilowatt hour rate, then you're now saying it'll cost us $27. So I think what you're trying to say is that, I'm not sure actually, but I'm thinking you're trying to say that we get, I'm going to call it a rebate from Morgan Stanley. We get payments from Morgan Stanley, or so I don't really understand from your explanation what the prepayment really means and how that really works to save us your $3. I don't think that that's clear.
Okay.
And the use of the prepayment, what's being prepaid? Are we saying, so I'm going to say to you what I think I understood before, which is the finance authority issues bonds, like any city can issue bonds on, like we just did on a new police station and library. The community passed the bond. So we passed the measure. So we can now bond against the income for all of the tax dollars over the 30 years. So the finance authority is literally saying we have a guaranteed income from our customers. And we are bonding against, we're going to issue tax exempt bonds against that guaranteed income. And we can issue that at a lower rate of dividend because it's tax exempt. And then what we're saying is there's this mechanism where we can sell, or the money, I don't know what the right word is, that the finance authority has obtained through the bond sales to Morgan Stanley. And Morgan Stanley will then go out with their own bond and it has a higher interest rate. If that's vaguely correct. I still don't quite understand how our contracts would change, our contract language, because you said that the PPA seller now has a contract with Morgan Stanley, or is it a contract for payment from Morgan Stanley? So, so I think the prepayment term is really related to the fact that we're bonding against the payments over time from our customers. So I think the term prepayment is very confusing, and why and what the relationship is between the PPA sellers and Morgan Stanley and how we get our power.
Okay, very, very good questions, Liz. So on the PPA, we still have a contract with the PPA seller. What we're doing is we're assigning part of it. We may not assign full contract, we may assign a part of it. But what we're saying is instead of getting payment from us for that energy, and instead of delivering that energy to us, you could, under the same terms and conditions that we negotiated, the power purchase agreement, you are now going to receive that payment from Morgan Stanley, and you're going to deliver that same energy as you would have delivered to us to Morgan Stanley. So that's how the PPA works. And if for any reason the prepayment structure falls apart or terminates for reasons we've specified in the contract, that this PPA would revert back to us and we go back to the original arrangement we had with the PPA seller. But as long as this arrangement is in place, the PPA seller says, okay, Silicon Valley and East Bay, instead of getting payment from you, I'm going to get payment from Morgan Stanley, and I'm going to deliver same energy to Morgan Stanley under same terms and conditions that we negotiated. Now, when we come to the bond, so similar to what you described with the city, the financing authority says, I have payments coming from the CCAs, from us and East Bay, that then can fund the payments to the bondholders, right? So the bondholders looks and says, okay, this is backed by a power contract, power supply agreement between these two entities, and I know that they can fund the payments. And I also know that Morgan Stanley is backing these bonds up as well. The term prepayment comes from is, how do we get that the bonds, the funds that the financing authority collected to Morgan Stanley? And the way under the tax arrangement that works for the tax laws is we're saying we are prepaying you on a net present value basis. So we're giving those funds up to Morgan Stanley. And in return, what we're asking for Morgan Stanley is to give us the energy that they're going to get from the PPA seller. So going forward, if you notice, Morgan Stanley is going to pay the contract price to the PPA seller, right? Why would they pay this price and give us the energy? Is because they have already received fund, the bonds collected by the CCFA, the funds from those bonds, and we're calling that prepayment for this energy. That's where the term prepayment comes from.
Thank you. So basically, what we're doing is Morgan Stanley is stepping in with this arrangements because they get a lot of cash and they can do their thing with the cash, however they choose to invest it. But we haven't explained where the delta is. If they're paying for and receiving the PPA at the same thing we've negotiated, how do we get more money? How do we save the 8 to 12%? Where is that in your diagram?
So that comes from the spread between the debt that they would have issued. Let's say they would have issued at a higher rate versus the debt that the financing authority issued. The difference between the debt translating to a bucket of dollars or savings.
So what I do understand that, but in one sense, Morgan Stanley is paying us, I'm gonna call it a finder's fee or a, some kind of a fee as a percentage of that difference. And that's where we make our money. Okay, so I've taken you through this in a little bit of a painful way, mostly
No.
I can explain it, but to myself. But I would offer that it might be more helpful in explaining this, particularly to some of the new board members, if you could relate some of the components to what they might already know. I just think that might be more helpful.
Good point.
Basically, Morgan Stanley is paying us money for them to get money ahead of time. And the
Yes.
amount they pay is the difference in the spread minus something a little bit, probably.
Yes, net of the transactions costs.
So it looks like Director Barber had a question next.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I have a question for staff. If this model replaces our current model for bonds and issuing bonds, where would these bonds be reflected in our financial statements, or would they not be, since it's issued by the CCFA?
Yes, very good question. So they will not show up on our balance sheet because we did not issue it. We just, our arrangement is this power supply agreement with the CCFA that you give us these megawatt hours, we'll give you this contract price that we negotiate up front. But it will show up on the CCFA's balance sheet. We may, and Mike Maha is on the call, he can opine on this, but I think on our financial statements, we may have a footnote indicating we have this financial arrangement.
Okay, Director Mekachuk, go ahead.
This is a very complex series of transactions, and it took me a lot of time to wrap my mind around it. And this is pretty sophisticated, structured finance. But what we're doing right now in our footnotes to the financial statements, if you look, you'll see that we've got a commitment to buy power in the future. And I think that total is like $1.492 billion or $1.392 billion. And what this is doing is prepaying part of that money. And Liz, I think your point is it may be easier to understand if there were some numbers on here, because the non-recourse tax-exempt bonds, we're talking about, depending on how it's structured, our share could be $375 million. And rather than us, what we would do is then take the proceeds, that's the gross amount of the agreement, but we can borrow that money and give Morgan Stanley the present value of that. So rather than Morgan Stanley going out and borrowing $375 million, they get it from us at a discounted rate that is cheaper than what they would pay to the market. And then they kind of hold that money, and then they pay out the contract price every month on our behalf. And what we do is we would pay less than the contract price, and we pay CCCFA, and then they pay back, they make the bond payments. I'm just trying to facilitate the understanding, and maybe we have to identify what some of those numbers are.
I appreciate your saying it's very complex. It is. I literally have been going through this, I'm sure at least 6 times, and it took me several passes, and I do sort of get it. I'm just trying to figure out how to explain it um, um, it'll be easier to understand from the majority of people. But thank you. That's good. This is a good conversation.
Go ahead, Director Bell.
Thank you. I just want to thank Brian and Liz both for those details because it was helpful. Amrit, thank you so much for walking me through this as well and your patience. I really appreciate it. But yes, I think I'll have to go through this again, but I feel like I got it. But certainly with the help, I think it is helpful to maybe have some of the, even if they're, estimates on an amount, it would help me to just understand. That was kind of my key question, was how we got to the, the 27, and that makes perfect sense. If I think of it, I know I'm probably thinking of it wrong, but how Liz said it, kind of like a finder's fee, that really helps me kind of put everything in order. So thank you all.
And I apologize for the music. It was somebody calling me on Skype, and until I exited full screen mode, I couldn't get to a decline button. One thing I think might be a little useful, Amrit, is to talk about what happens if somebody goes bankrupt. What happens if Morgan Stanley goes bankrupt? Or what happens if the PPA seller goes bankrupt? Who's responsible for these bonds and so forth?
So good question, Rob. So the entity that's responsible for the bonds is Morgan Stanley. We are not responsible for them. So when an investor invests in these bonds, they know that the credit risk they're inheriting is Morgan Stanley credit risk. And they're pretty well rated entity. In terms of the PPA seller, if the PPA seller fails in its obligations, the remedies that we have already negotiated under the terms of the PPA will apply to the seller. And in terms of the PPA structure, if this one PPA seller drops out, we can put in another PPA contract through this. As you know, the initial amount that we're doing here in prepay structure is fairly small, somewhere around 8 to 10% of our annual load. So there's a lot more energy flowing through that we could substitute back into this prepay structure.
And if Morgan Stanley goes bankrupt, we don't have to worry about the bonds. The bond issuer, the bond purchasers lose out. And our contract to the PPA seller goes back to where it was. It's reverse novated, maybe I can say. And so we can continue buying directly from the PPA seller, just not at a discount if Morgan Stanley goes bankrupt. So it doesn't really hurt us if this falls apart.
That's correct. Yeah.
And the one other thing, I can't recall if you mentioned it, but this is very complicated and we're not doing all this negotiating ourselves. We've hired a fifth party that's none of these people to help us work all this out, right? That's working in our interest.
Yeah, and I'll just go to a slide in the appendix. We have a lot of professionals we've hired with a lot of years of experience in this, and we have Mike Berminger on the call as well. He's done a lot of these transactions, and he's our financial advisor for both us and East Bay. And then we have all the tax attorneys representing either us and the JPA to help us through these transactions. And was there a question?
Amrit, I'd just like to make a comment when you're done. I apologize for interrupting.
Go ahead, Mike.
Sure. I thought just a couple things here. So I understand this is very unique for you guys. What we have previously presented, I realized it wasn't in here. You're not breaking new ground. Prepays have been around for over 20 years. There's been over 60 billion of these done. I've personally worked on probably about 2/3 of these transactions on this page. These have been widely used, in particular throughout the Southeast and in the municipal utility sector. They have largely been for natural gas procurement, but the same financial technology applies for a power commodity. So just within the state of California, I'll hit some of the high points here. SMUD has done 3 of these. Their latest was a gas into a power structure. So it started as gas, it goes into power. The balance of these have been largely gas. The ones in SCAPA, which is the SoCal Public Power Authority there, sort of 4th from the bottom, those are actually direct with the developers. That structure, if you could, you would do this directly with your PPA providers. You can't, they're not interested in doing it. The investment bank is highly motivated. And as has been discussed, they place a lot of value on your willingness to pay them upfront for a 30-year commitment of power. And in return, you're receiving that discount. You're relying on a lot of tried and true financial technology here. I wanted to maybe piggyback on the comment made about, the way this is structured. You've performed by handing over the money to Morgan Stanley. So there is no way for you to fail because you've done your part. All you have to do is take the power that you paid for, right? If Morgan Stanley fails, it's deemed a termination event within the contracts, and they are required to make a termination payment, which is sized to pay off the bondholders. Nowhere in the prospectus, known as an offering statement for those in Guinea land, does it obligate you in any way, shape, or form to pay that debt. I would note that this has actually happened. It's been tested. Lehman Brothers, who is now bankrupt and out of business, was a provider of one of these in the Southeast. They did go bankrupt, and the structure performed through that process as expected. Sorry for the interruption, Amrit. I just wanted to
excellent point.
circle that all up for folks. Sure.
Director Gibbons, did you have another question? Your hand was still up. Go ahead.
Thank you all. And Amrit knows the advantage of having these committee meetings is we get to, staff gets to see how engaged our board of directors are in understanding what we're doing. So I appreciate having all of this information and all the work that stands behind it. So I would offer one other thought, which is when we go to the board, Director Elahi had a lot of questions last time around on the JPA and long-term power JPA. And I would look at some of the questions he asked then to have that information in your presentation. Very much like what Mike just talked about. It has been tested, it has been proven, there was a bankruptcy, it did work. I liked someone's suggestion about having some dollars in there. It would very helpful to say we've got $1.45 billion in PPAs. We are talking about 250 million of these contracts, so that the measure of risk can be brought to bear, so people don't get overly concerned about that. So I think some dollar examples would help, and thinking about the questions that Director Elahi asked the last time about the JPA and who's going to make the decisions at the board, who's on that board, and all of those kind of questions. Because I would guess he would probably ask something similar. So I appreciate Amrit.
I assume that was really not a question, but a suggestion statement, right?
Yes. Sorry about that. Yes.
Director Martinez Beltran.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to understand. So the structure would continue in the case of a bankruptcy and has continued. So since we've already paid upfront, then we would still continue to have that discount because it's already been paid up front.
I apologize, Director, if I was not clear. In the case of a bankruptcy, the transaction terminates, and your downside is that you lose the discount in that instance. If one of the entities in one of these boxes fails to perform, there are a lot of fail safes, I guess I would describe them as. There's a lot of provisions to try to correct those issues prior to it triggering an event of default. But if the worst case happens and you do get to a default event, the entire transaction terminates and comes down, and the bonds, a payment will be made to bondholders. So at that point, we like to describe it as your worst case scenario is you've come to really love that discount and you lose it, but you're not going to be on the hook for those bonds. I think that's a very important distinction.
And we have the energy.
Correct. The PPAs are supposed to revert back to you, and that's actually, it's one of the issues that we've been dealing with over the past several months, is that piece of it, to ensure that there are no hiccups on the contract front.
And does it matter how far we're into the contract? I mean, if we're 25 years in, 20 years in, we still lose the discount?
If the transaction terminates, you lose the discount, correct? Even if,
For the entirety.
It goes away. If it terminates in full, it goes away, correct? You always have the ability to come back and do another transaction with a different counterparty, though.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Director Mekachuk?
I think the question was, do you lose the discount that you've already paid? We would realize the discount that we have paid through the term to the point of termination of the agreement. Is that correct, Mike?
Yes, that's the appropriate characterization, correct. You don't have to give the discount back, if that's the question. I apologize if I missed that one. Whatever discount you've earned, you keep, and then you just prospectively would lose any discount going forward.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that does help clarify. Thank you so much, Brian.
Are we ready to open this up to public, see if they have any comments? Does any member of the public wish to comment on this? If so, raise your virtual hand, please. Do not see anybody raising their hand. We'll close the public comment. Emrit, did you have anything else on this?
Just a few other slides, but we've covered most of it. I can go through it fairly quickly. This slide we talked about, we're creating the CCFA. We're working with, in addition to East Bay, also Marin and 3CE. So this is a conduit that initially all 4 of us will be the founding members, and we're expect to complete in Q2. And then all the transactions we talked about. We are in negotiations right now with Morgan Stanley to finalize those. And I'll show our tentative schedule in a minute. On the JPA conduit that's likely to come up into the board approval, we will be one of the founding members. Then after it's been established, we can have associate members such as other non-founding CCAs that can be added later, or other municipal governmental agencies as well. Each board member will pay an equal share of the G&A costs. These are expected to be very low. They're just, for example, we may have a controller to manage the finances. But the cost of the prepayment projects would be boxed. So if Marin is doing their own prepay using the same conduit, all the costs associated with that prepay will go to them. Likewise, our costs will come to us, and of course we're doing it with East Bay, so we'll share equally on that. And we talked about this, the bonds are not obligation to us or any of the members. The other 2 points we've covered. In terms of the schedule, so we're calling this a tentative schedule because before we pull the trigger, it depends on the market economics of where the spread is, the spread between taxable and tax exempt debt. It's not at a level right now where we would execute to realize the savings we want to realize. The spread was very low, but has been improving. Just as recently as a few days ago, some gas prepaid deals got executed, one of them with Morgan Stanley, just very recently. So the spreads are trending in the right direction. But what we want to do is be in a position so that we've set up a structure, we've negotiated all the agreements, and when the spreads are there, we can execute. And depending on the timing of that spreads, we could either have to speed up this timetable, or we may take it to the point where we have all the transactions ready to execute, but not execute until the spreads are there. And before we execute anything, we will bring all the transaction documents to the board for approval. Those were the other main slides I wanted to cover. Any questions on?
Director Klein?
Yes, thank you, and thanks for the slides. The slide deck has been very helpful. How much do those rates fluctuate looking historically, and how quickly, when we make the decision? So I understand you're talking about speeding things up, and does that mean ultimately, if we see rates getting progressively better, quickly having meetings, but this needs to go in front of the whole board, so it's what time frame, how quickly do you want to kind of turn the crank to get this done? Or is this historically relatively slow moving, as far as these rates are concerned?
The markets can change fairly quickly. The spreads are moving in the right direction. There's a lot of, with the stimulus bills and concern about taxes going up, the spreads could materialize. I should be careful when I say we'll speed up. There's some opportunity to speed up, but not a whole lot, because we do have to go through and negotiate all these detailed deals fairly carefully. And Mike, do you have anything to add to that? Or?
No, I think you nailed it. I think the schedule's a pretty good approximation of what we can do, maybe a little faster by a month-ish. To your question though, I think a month ago, the market was not there for deals to get done. And as Amrit explained, there's been 2 transactions that have been in the market just this week. So there's been a lot of volatility. Things are moving rapidly. I think it's given us that have been working on this for, we've been at this for quite some time. So I think, it's starting to feel like the market is coming to that point. Sadly, we think of this backwards. It's really unfortunate. We really need rates to go up, basically, which, sort of counterintuitive. We're hoping for higher rates, but that actually is really what we need. And we're seeing some of that, to Amrit's point.
How do we think a Biden administration infrastructure focus would affect those rates?
Oh, you guys
make them worse, make them less? Just
I am not a political person, so this is purely I got my economic hat on here. What we know is over the last month, the investor community has had a lot of pushback on the Fed. Chairman Powell has been very firm. He's holding rates on the short end low for the foreseeable future. He has not wavered. However, investors have a difference of opinion. They see a lot of inflation pressure, and they're trying to push rates up. People need to keep in mind that nobody controls interest rates, the market does. And I would say that the latest round of stimulus definitely sort of stepped on the gas. I think the news this morning about a potential $3 billion infrastructure package definitely makes the investor community concerned about inflation and higher rates. So I think in a roundabout way, I got to your answer without being too specific on the administration's policies. But I think that, whether that comes through fruition and really materializes in the coming months, we'll know it when we get there, kind of thing. But I definitely think there's more headwinds now than there were, 6 to 12 months ago on that front.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions before I assume Amrit, you've covered all your slides. So any other questions before we finish?
I have. I think Director Mekachuk has a question.
I was going to make a comment with respect to tax rates for high tax individuals. If those marginal tax rates go up, Mike, what happens to the attractiveness of municipal bonds, tax exempt bonds?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question as well. So again, it's sort of it's backwards, right? It's inverse. Higher tax rates is actually good for tax exempt bond rates. It's more valuable to an investor, so they're willing to take less of a return upfront because on an after-tax basis, they're getting a higher return. And one of the things I like to highlight for folks that has come up in our conversations over the year, on the left coast of the country, we have the highest tax rates, just happens to be that way. And one of the last allowances for tax shelter in the investing world, municipal bonds. So what we've seen since tax reform in 2017 has been a tremendous amount of demand in California, which continues to, what that does is because there's outside demand and there's higher tax rates here, your borrowing rates in California for anybody that's been in the market at the city level are a lot lower than a comparably situated entity in, say, the middle of the country somewhere. Double-edged sword, I guess.
Are we ready to close this item, everybody? I guess no further questions. So we'll close item number 5 and move on to item number 6, which is our meeting dates for the year. So I guess we're proposing to have quarterly meetings in May, August, and December. Does the committee members have any issues with those proposals? I assume if something else comes up, we'll schedule something in between. Andrea is shaking her head.
Yes, correct.
It looks like everybody's happy with that. Do you need a motion or just?
Yeah, I was actually hoping to see if we could nail down some of these dates since we have everybody in this meeting.
Okay.
So I guess one question to pose is, do Tuesday afternoons generally work for everybody?
No. What time?
It really is dependent. Well, if I was just considering the 1 o'clock, if it were to work for everybody, but it looks like Director Gibbons may have conflicts.
I also can't do Tuesday afternoons. This was an anomaly, but I usually cannot do Tuesdays.
Okay. All right. Tuesday afternoon is out.
So afternoons, I think are tough. I would rather do mornings if it's at all possible. I don't know how that works on other people's calendars.
Okay.
How do others feel about mornings?
I can't do mornings right now. I don't know where we'll be. I'm Zooming 3 kids under 7. And to Zoom you also might be difficult. But we're talking about 3 meetings, right?
Yeah.
Correct. One in May, August, and December.
Okay. May, August, and December. Do you have the date?
As opposed, so sorry to jump in, but as opposed to try to do this here, I would think that, doing a doodle poll a few months ahead
There.
makes
Good.
a lot, or a month ahead of the proposed date is a lot easier than trying to pick a date and time at this point. And that's just my take on it. I'm between jobs right now myself, and I have no idea where I'll be later this year. And so I can say whatever, we can try to pick dates and times now, but I know it's important to do appropriate Brown Act noticing, but I don't think it's worth our time to discuss at length. That might take.
And I can also alternate if that makes people's lives easier as well.
Girish, you had something to add?
Yeah, thanks. I think we'd be happy to send out a doodle poll, but the real strong request to all the board members is that there's a reason for the timing for May and August. And May is when we're going to discuss financial levers. August, we're going to have the draft budget ready. And there's really a very narrow window because we'll be taking it to you, we'll be taking it to the exec committee and then the board. And these meetings are kind of building on each other sequentially. So that's just context for when we send you some dates via email. So definitely the May and August, it's critical for us in our planning because it impacts other committees too. So we'll send you some dates based on the preferences expressed and get a time. Thank you.
Okay, so Andrea, do you have what you need from us?
I believe so. Is there any?
Or as good
any
as we
other-
can do?
Yeah, I think we're good.
Okay. I'll officially, would any member of the public wish to comment on this? Don't see any hands being raised. Okay, I'll close public testimony since nobody seems to want to comment on that item. And that brings us to
Rob, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, taking a second crack at this. I'm just wondering if we could just express some preferences so that when Andrea sends out her email, she'll have some guidance and I think we've heard about morning and afternoon, but if there's just some general preferences on don't even try these days, that may assist us in getting, because I know when I get a doodle poll with 20 choices, it gets a big pain to fill that out too.
Brian?
I would offer that first and third Tuesdays are typical council meetings for some of us. I don't know if others are. I know Saratoga is on Wednesdays, but I don't know. Does anyone else have meetings on Mondays or other days? 'Cause
Wednesdays
Wednesdays. So
plus SVCE.
yeah, so maybe Thursday, although there's big meetings on Thursday, but maybe a Thursday or a Monday might be better.
Okay. Any other no's on particular days?
I was going to comment, my only day is on Fridays. I would prefer not to have a Friday meeting if that's possible. But no one said Friday, so I think we're good.
Trevin, what have you got going?
Just Tuesdays. Tuesdays are booked usually. I'm good with anything else pretty much.
For me, you just need to miss the Bay Area Air Quality Management District meetings, which I don't have down in my head very well. I'm on the Mobile Source Committee and the main board meeting. Those tend to happen in the morning, once a month for each of them. And then there's one other meeting also with them. So we just have to figure out which week they are in the morning.
Thank you, Chair. That's helpful.
Okay, so Director Beltran, did you have more on this one?
No, thank you.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
So let's close item number 6 then, which brings us to the end of our regular calendar. Before we adjourn, are there any committee or staff remarks? Don't see any. So
Thank you.
Go ahead, Liz.
I'm just saying thank you.
Okay, so let's close the meeting. Thank you, everybody.